It's June 30th, and on paper at least, President Cyril Ramaphosa has drawn this really hard line in the sand.
Right, issuing that very public directive.
Exactly. A public directive that absolute order just has to be maintained. He basically explicitly warned against any vigilantism targeting undocumented immigrants.
Which is, a very top-down clinical promise of control.
Yeah, he's insisting that border enforcement is strictly the domain of the police and the state. So that's the policy.
But if you actually stand outside Sherwood Hall in Durban today, you are definitely not seeing order.
No, not at all.
You are looking at a really chaotic, totally kinetic reality. I mean, you're watching police officers deploy stun grenades.
Stun grenades and rubber bullets.
Yeah, rubber bullets into a crowd of Malalian nationals. You are essentially seeing the physical breakdown of that exact policy playing out in real time.
Wow. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is taking this massive stack of recent news and ground reports coming out of South Africa and, piecing them all together.
Which is quite a task right now.
It really is, because we are looking at a society in the midst of this profound stress test. I mean, we're covering everything from those intense presidential warnings and severe economic gridlock, all the way down to TikTok bans.
Right, and how all this national anxiety is just destroying private cross-border relationships.
Exactly. But before we really get into the weeds here.
Yeah, I actually want to jump in and be really clear with you listening. The material we are analyzing today involves some highly charged, deeply polarizing sociopolitical issues.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at migration, state enforcement, digital censorship, and some really major political maneuvers. So our role here is strictly analytical. We are just unpacking the reality on the ground and the strategies being deployed totally impartially without endorsing any specific viewpoint or political faction.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand the massive political maneuvers happening ahead of the 2026 elections, we really have to start at that physical bottleneck in Durban.
Right, Sherwood Hall.
Yeah. Ramaphosa gives this June 30th mandate. He says, leave immigration to the authorities. Do not take the law into your own hands. But the authorities themselves are completely overwhelmed.
Yes. And Sherwood Hall is basically the perfect microcosm of that system overload.
How so?
Well, you have thousands of Malawian nationals, and many of them are lacking documentation. And they had essentially just been camped out at this hall.
Just waiting.
Yeah, just waiting. The local authorities attempted to relocate them. The state's actual plan was to move these individuals to the Lindela Repatriation Center.
And just for context, that's essentially a massive government-run holding facility.
Exactly. It's used to process deportations, or they were trying to move them to other designated zones.
But a really significant portion of that crowd actively resisted the relocation.
They did.
And I guess that is where the stun grenades and the rubber bullets come into play. It's just human desperation meeting the blunt force of state logistics.
What's fascinating here is the mechanics of that breakdown. I mean, a presidential decree assumes a functioning conveyor belt of bureaucracy.
Right, like step one, step two.
Yeah, exactly. You identify an undocumented person, you process them, you repatriate them. That's the theory.
But the reality is way messier.
So much messier. When you have thousands of people trapped in this agonizing limbo, and they're terrified of being sent to a facility like Lindela against their will, that bureaucratic conveyor belt just totally jams.
Right.
The clinical nature of the policy instantly devolves into this physical, chaotic conflict with law enforcement.
It's kind of like watching a city's plumbing completely back up.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Right. The government is trying to regulate the pressure, trying to keep the lid on, but they literally lack the physical infrastructure to process the volume. So what does this all mean for the actual people caught in the middle of these systemic bottlenecks?
Well, that systemic failure doesn't just stay isolated to a single hall in Durban. It spreads.
It bleeds out into the wider region.
Exactly. That tension, and specifically the fear it generates, it immediately acts as a massive brake pad on the entire economy. Just look at what is happening with Santaco.
Right, the South African National Taxi Council. For anyone who doesn't know, they operate this sprawling network of minibuses.
Millions of people rely on them. It's the primary mode of transport across the region.
And if you think about the informal economy in Southern Africa, those taxis are essentially the fiber optic cables of commerce.
Oh, totally.
They move seasonal labor, they move informal traders buying and selling goods, they move remittances back to families in other countries.
But right now, Santaco is reporting a catastrophic drop in passengers, specifically people taking cross-border trips into SADC, the Southern African Development Community.
So the taxis are literally sitting empty.
Literally empty. And the underlying mechanism for that drop is purely psychological.
It's the fear.
Exactly. The anti-foreigner rhetoric on the ground, combined with the reality of clashes like the one at Sherwood Hall we just talked about, it's created an environment that is simply too hostile to navigate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We often frame this as just a debate about undocumented migration, but it is an immediate economic driver because it is not just undocumented individuals who are avoiding travel right now.
No, not at all.
If you are holding a valid passport, a perfectly legal work permit, and you have totally legitimate business reasons to cross the border, you are still not getting in that taxi.
Because the general atmosphere of vigilantism on the ground, it doesn't stop to politely check your paperwork before targeting you.
Right. The threat of violence doesn't discriminate between legal and illegal status.
Exactly. So for the average traveler, the physical risk right now massively outweighs the economic reward of taking the trip.
It is just an incredible demonstration of how an economy actually functions. I mean, we so often talk about economics in terms of, interest rates or trade tariffs.
Abstract concepts, yeah.
But at its core, an economy is driven by human confidence and mobility. When you sever that confidence with the threat of physical violence, you sever the supply chains.
The cross-border vendors can't buy their stock.
Right. The families don't receive their cash. The taxi drivers can't buy fuel. It is this cascading mechanical failure of the informal sector, and it's driven entirely by rhetoric and fear.
Yeah. And when mobility freezes on a macroeconomic level like that, you also start to see a hyperfixation on borders at the micro level.
The micro level meaning like personal lives.
Yes. The national anxiety over who belongs and who doesn't, it begins to infiltrate the most private, intimate spaces of people's lives. Macro politics are becoming hyper-localized.
Oh, wow. Which I guess brings us to the whole love across borders phenomenon that's currently going viral on social media.
Exactly. We are seeing these incredibly raw, localized manifestations of this massive geopolitical crisis.
Like that story of the local woman from Mpangini.
Yeah, she posted about her utter heartbreak over ending a relationship with the father of her child.
Wait, she ended it purely because he is a Malawian national.
Yes. She felt compelled to fracture her own family unit because of the immense societal pressure. And just the sheer logistical nightmare of trying to maintain a cross-border relationship in this current climate.
That's heartbreaking. And then you have this bizarre inverse situation happening simultaneously.
The Zimbabwean woman.
Yeah. This Zimbabwean woman recently went viral claiming that the moment she returned to her home country, her inbox was flooded with literally thousands of marriage proposals from South African men.
It's wild. You have this systemic national drive pushing foreign nationals out. Yet on an individual, interpersonal level, citizens are actively reaching across those exact same borders, seeking intimacy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals a profound cognitive dissonance within the public sphere.
It really does. But because these deeply personal interactions are playing out in the digital town square, they're immediately weaponized.
Well, for sure, the comment section is ruthless.
Right. The border is no longer just a physical checkpoint you cross in a Santiago minibus. The border is now actively policed in the comment sections of social media.
Look at the massive controversy surrounding the social media figure Fakulum Thakte. He recently posted photos of a local South African woman who was dating a Malawian man, and it just ignited an absolute firestorm.
It became a real-time proxy war.
People were furious.
Yeah, half of the online community accused him of severe cyberbullying. They argued he was targeting a private citizen and weaponizing national anti-immigrant sentiment against a woman's personal romantic choices.
But then a massive contingent rushed to defend him. They were treating him like some sort of digital vigilante protecting national interests.
The two private individuals went on a date, and suddenly their relationship is subjected to a national tribunal over immigration policy.
It's insane. And if the comment section is the new front line of this border war, that immediately raises the stakes of who actually controls that space, like who gets to moderate the national discourse.
This raises an important question, right?
Yep.
Which brings us directly to the banning of Jacinta Ngobi Zuma's TikTok account.
Yes, let's talk about that.
This single moderation decision by a tech platform has triggered a nationwide debate about the limits of free speech.
Let's really dig into the friction there, because we just outlined a reality where physical violence is erupting at places like Sherwood Hall, right?
Right.
And economic lifelines are being severed out of sheer terror. So in a socio-political climate as volatile as the one we just described, a literal tinderbox, where exactly is the line drawn between protecting the public and censoring free speech?
Well, defenders of the ban argue that this isn't an abstract debate about free speech anymore. It is about stopping a literal spark from hitting dry brush.
The harm reduction angle.
Exactly. They argue platforms have a duty of care to deplatform voices that amplify the exact rhetoric that is, emptying those taxis and causing riots. You cannot shout fire in a crowded theater, especially when the theater is already panicking.
Right. But the critics of the ban, the free speech advocates, they counter that deplatforming is mechanically flawed. Suppressing a highly visible voice doesn't extinguish the underlying sentiment.
If anything, it validates their victimhood.
Totally. It turns them into a martyr for their followers. And it just pushes that discourse into darker, unmoderated corners of the internet.
Like encrypted group chats.
Yeah, places where it cannot be publicly challenged or debated at all. And it also hands a terrifying amount of power to a private tech company.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have an algorithm or some moderation team sitting in an office block on another continent, essentially acting as an unelected arbiter of South Africa's domestic peace.
It's a huge shift in power.
Today, they ban a view you find dangerous, but the precedent is set for them to ban a legitimate political movement tomorrow.
And that immense, unregulated power is exactly why major political figures are paying incredibly close attention to these digital skirmishes. Politicians recognize that these online battles over moderation and public sentiment are the literal blueprints for the 2026 elections.
They are looking at the exact same volatile landscape we've discussed today, and they are trying to capture that raw, untreated anxiety and convert it into political capital.
Which leads us to two incredibly contrasting strategies from opposite ends of the political spectrum.
Let's start with Helen Zille and the Democratic Alliance, the DA.
Okay, to frame this, the DA has historically been the country's official opposition party. They are generally known for a more centrist, market-friendly stance.
The establishment, basically.
Right. But recently, Helen Zille held a highly scrutinized meeting with an organization called March and March.
And the leader of March and March is none other than Jacinta Ngobisuma.
The exact same figure who was just banned from TikTok in that massive moderation debate.
It's wild. You have one of the most prominent established politicians in the country sitting down with a newly deplatformed, highly controversial populist figure.
And top leaders within the DA are reportedly furious about this.
I can imagine. It sparks huge questions about whether the DA is shifting its official stance on migration.
Because it forces an internal identity crisis within the party. The political math here is fascinating, though risky. Traditional political campaigning via press releases and standard media is losing its grip.
Yeah, nobody shares a press release.
Exactly. But viral grassroots populism, even when it gets deplatformed, it commands massive, highly engaged audiences. By meeting with a figure like Jacinta, Zille appears to be testing whether the DA needs to shift its long-standing, moderate stance on migration to capture this heavily polarized, digital-first electorate.
It is a massive gamble. The DA is navigating this very murky digital-era alliance, basically trying to harness an algorithmic wave without drowning in it.
But then you pivot over to Jacob Zuma and the MK Party. And their strategy to capture this exact same anxious electorate couldn't be more different.
They're going in a completely different direction.
Totally. The MK Party is a relatively newly formed populist disruptor in the political landscape. And Jacob Zuma has recently laid out some bold, frankly radical proposals.
What's the main one?
Chief among them, if the MK Party takes power, they propose the entire education system will undergo a structural shift. All grade 12 graduates, so high school seniors, would be required to spend 1 year in a military camp.
Wait, is it military camps for high schoolers?
Yes, mandatory for all graduates.
Wow. My mind immediately goes to historical precedents for youth mobilization. Usually, when a political leader proposes putting an entire generation of teenagers into uniform, it happens because the state feels its fundamental identity is under threat.
Exactly.
Is Zuma trying to bypass the digital debate entirely and forge a new, rigid national identity through sheer physical discipline?
That actually aligns really closely with their stated objectives. The proposal aims to teach these graduates patriotism and self-defense. And furthermore, Zuma has coupled this youth militarization plan with promises to overhaul current laws and aggressively address historical land ownership issues.
Which has obviously sparked immense political debate. Let's connect that back to the landscape we just walked through. We are looking at a society terrified of physical vigilantism,
Right.
a society where people are fracturing their own families over passport statuses and where the informal economy is stalling out of sheer panic. And the MK Party's proposed solution isn't to calm the waters.
No, it's to physically militarize the youth. So they are prepared to defend themselves within that fractured society.
It's just staggering.
Both the DA's digital maneuvering and the MK Party's militarization proposals stem from the exact same root cause, which is a profound, nationwide deficit of security.
Yeah.
When the state struggles to enforce order, like we saw at Sherwood Hall, people seek security elsewhere. They seek it by policing their neighbors online, by demanding censorship on TikTok, or by backing political leaders who promise radical hardline interventions.
It is an immense web of cause and effect. I mean, we started this deep dive looking at a single date, June 30th, and President Ramaphosa's attempt to use top-down policy to keep a lid on vigilante violence. And from there, we just tracked the fallout.
We saw the logistical breakdown of state deportations turn into rubber bullets in Durban.
We saw how the psychological terror of that breakdown severed the fiber optic cables of the SADC economy, leaving Sanaco minibuses empty and cross-border trade paralyzed.
We watched that anxiety cross the threshold of the home, breaking apart families in Mpangini and turning local dating choices into national cyberbullying scandals.
We witnessed global tech companies getting dragged into the fray, acting as referees in a volatile free speech debate by deplatforming controversial voices.
And finally, we saw how the political heavyweights for 2026, from Helen Zill's controversial alliances to Jacob Zuma's youth military camps, are actively harvesting this chaos to consolidate power.
And this is exactly why taking a step back to view the entire board is so crucial. A policy debated in a sterile, air-conditioned parliamentary office does not stay there.
Never.
It immediately dictates whether an informal trader can afford to feed their family, whether a local TikToker gets to speak, and how teenagers might spend their first year out of high school.
Absolutely. Our goal is to map out the mechanics of these shifts so you listening can understand the underlying forces driving the headlines impartially and without the partisan spin.
Which leaves us with a final, slightly different angle to consider as we look toward those 2026 elections.
Okay, what are you thinking?
Well, we have spent this whole time discussing how South Africa is internally reacting to this friction, right? Closing digital borders, closing physical borders, proposing militarized youth camps.
Right.
But what happens to South Africa's position on the broader continent? If political rhetoric today is powerful enough to instantly empty cross-border taxis and turn private relationships into viral public debates, how deeply will these digital and economic borders rewire society by the time this next generation of students comes of age?
That's a huge question.
And if the economic powerhouse of Southern Africa becomes too hostile for cross-border talent and commerce, do we start seeing a massive regional brain drain? When the developers, the entrepreneurs, and the essential labor decide the Sanaco taxi isn't worth the risk, do they bypass South Africa entirely and take their capital to emerging tech hubs in Rwanda or Kenya instead?
It is a vital question. Isolationism rarely happens in a vacuum.
You try to pull up the drawbridge to protect the castle, and you might just end up starving the kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and we will see you next time.